Please welcome our second speaker today, John Mahlman, and the presentation Zero to Secure, how we secured our environment without much pain. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Rusty.
Go ahead and show your slides.
Sure, let me just get that up here. Great. All right, well, hello everyone, and welcome to Zero to Secure, where I'll tell you today about how we secured our Mac environment without much pain, because let's be honest, there's going to be some pain always. I am your speaker, John Mahlman. I've been a MacAdmin for about 13 years. I'm currently the lead, the Mac Engineering Lead, for Leidos. If you're not familiar, Leidos is an international technology and research contractor, and we're one of the top 5 DoD contractors in the US. There's my contact information, so at J Mahlman on Slack, and my very lonely blog that hasn't been updated in a while. So before I start, I would like to set some expectations about what this presentation is and kind of what it's not. This is not going to be a highly technical presentation. I will share some technologies that we use to get our devices up to compliance and some suggestions on tools and scripts, but I'm not going to be taking a huge deep dive into them. Most of this is more of a project management presentation. I will discuss how we planned the rollout and how we communicated it to users. So if you're hoping that this would be I would give you a big script here and get compliant, I'm sorry, you're still going to have some work to do. Okay. Now that's out of the way. Very brief overview of the presentation. I'm going to go over some background. So why we're doing this, what we're doing, and how we got there, planning stages, implementation of the plan, and some basic lessons learned and, well, whatever else. So some background on the project so you get a general scope of the work in mind. So we had a simple goal. This was literally the goal. Ensure all Macs are managed and secure. We need to do this for various reasons, which I'll get into, but basically we need a thumbs up from cybersecurity for all Macs in our environment. Speaking of those Macs, we believe we had anywhere from about 400 to 700 in the environment. I'm putting a question mark there because, again, we kind of didn't know. We had about 100 or so already in Jamf, and we also didn't know who had these machines. Now, we had some ways to find them, but we didn't know who actually had them. What we were being asked to secure devices for compliance, NIST 800-171, with the eventual goal of CMMC level 3 or 4. So if you're not familiar with CMMC, it's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. I think that's it. It's a unified standard for implementing cybersecurity across DoD and other government information systems. It's pretty new. Version 1.0 was released in January 2020, so that's how new it is. CMMC level 3 is generally NIST 800 with some added standards. Level 4 is where things get a little more difficult, where it adds things like app allow listing. And deep discussion is not in scope for this presentation, but if you'd like more info, there's going to be some links at the very end of the presentation. I'd also be willing to chat in Slack or just DM me. We need this compliance, though, to win contracts. We're a defense contractor, so higher compliance means we can get more business, which is good for us. We also wanted to do this, obviously, to make life easier for the users and the admins. Managing security on, or trying to manage security on unmanaged devices is kind of a nightmare for everybody, so we wanted to make this easy. Oh, I forgot to mention, this was to be done in 12 months, right? Well, no, it was originally 12 months and then 8 months. So our goal was to manage 400 to 700 devices within 8 months. So more on the why. So with endpoint compliance comes infrastructure compliance. Usually infrastructure compliance comes first. So we're already implementing some of these controls. I'm going to let you narrow down which ones are real. I'm not going to go into that. You might be surprised. Managing these on unmanaged devices is kind of a nightmare, so getting control of all the devices would allow us to standardize this and meet the security requirements. So it's a win-win for everybody. Now, mind you, these users have been around for a while. It's not like these are a new phenomenon in Leidos or just in general in our environment. They were just kind of ignored. So we've already had devices out there, and this is kind of what it caused, right? Or what caused it. This is these go hand in hand. Legacy practices and tools. They replace old tools and they get something new that's not Mac friendly because, they're not in scope, which also means no enterprise support. And that leads to things you'd expect. So we had groups that were fending for themselves to get compliant. They had various different antiviruses or different ways to do administrative rights. And because they also, were kind of ignored, they had an animosity toward us. They didn't really like IT. They saw us as just the boogeyman coming to take away their toys, or just somebody that doesn't get it, right? We don't get Macs. And for the most part, I think IT didn't get Macs. So that's why I was brought on to help wrangle it. My colleague was there much longer, and he did a phenomenal job with what he had. But we had to finally wrangle everything in. So we've got some background. We had to produce a process to deploy these things. So make it, plan it, communicate it, do it. And just want you to remember, though, every environment is different. So what I'm talking about here might not work for you, but I hope it gives you some direction. So just note that this isn't gospel. This is just what we came up with that worked for us. And some things didn't work. So this is what we had to keep in mind. Most of our Mac users are developers. They're pretty tech savvy, and they're doing the work that keeps the company making money. Because of this, we didn't want to break the business. So if the devs are not able to use their computers, they're not able to develop products to deliver to our customers. That's bad. So our idea was to secure the devices first and then enhance things later, because we figured, okay, there's going to be plenty of time to enhance the service after it's secure. But based on these things we were keeping in mind, we decided that we're not erasing those devices. And I could hear the gasps from some people thinking, oh my God, you're going to completely secure these devices that have been in use for 3 years. Well, yeah, we did. So even internally, this was a bit controversial. We took the information from the last slide and made some quick pros and cons. Just give you a moment to read these. Probably things you expect. But we thought about it a good deal, and internally, again, we had different approaches, and then finally, I kind of swayed everybody to go and not erase the devices. All right, we made some early decisions. Here's a basic roadmap, literally a roadmap. This came with the slide template, so I liked it. Collect an inventory of the machines. Step one, right? Develop the schedule and tell the users what that schedule is, and then deploy and adjust. This is overly simplified. I don't even want to show you what the actual timeline looked like because it's 4 streams, including a breakout stream. But this is a very broad summary of it. So that first one, let's find those machines. We did use a few methods to find them. So we did have good purchase records. We still do, excuse me. We have good purchase records. We had ABM at the start, so we knew about a lot of machines. That was great, but we still needed to find out who had them because we didn't, some of that information is either stale or ABM, of course, doesn't have that. But we wanted to find out so we could contact them. So we also used infrastructure logs. People were still connecting to VPN. We had antivirus installed, tickets. So there were people submitting tickets and doing all these things on unmanaged devices, but they were Leidos machines, so they were able to request this thing up until the security compliance came into play. So yeah, this is how we got some of that information. So most of the enrollments that we did eventually were user initiated. We had some but we also did try enrolling some by pushing an enrollment package via our AV server. So it's another good hint is if you have an AV server capable, or another infrastructure server capable of pushing packages out to people that are maybe not enrolled, but they probably have a piece of software, so try that. So once we get the machines in, we started inventorying the software and hardware. We wanted to ensure the software was okay to keep in the systems, and more importantly, we wanted to make sure we're not going to install over another security suite on top of an existing one. We wanted to see the OS breakdown, so we were only going to support N-1, so Catalina and Mojave, but we knew we had systems coming in with 10.13 and 10.12, so we had to figure out how we're going to handle those. As for the hardware, we wanted to make sure the machines were good enough, I'm using air quotes, to run our security stack. And and to ensure that when we manage them, the performance hit wouldn't be too bad. We're going to be installing a bunch of security products on these machines. It's going to affect some performance, some worse than others. So let's try to find that before it happens. We also, of course, needed to make sure that they could run 1014 at a minimum, and if not, we would retire them. We'd basically tell the user, well, you can't manage this device. And lastly, we wanted to find out what the most popular models were. We were going to use this to determine our purchasing offers when we add them to our hardware catalog. Spoiler alert, 15-inch MacBook Pro, by far most popular. Still is, well, 16-inch right now still is. All right. So we have the machines enrolling. That we're analyzing that inventory as they're enrolling because it's kind of a rolling basis. Now we want to figure out how to deploy the security settings and the software updates. We knew the baseline we're using. We had almost all of the software we were going to use chosen already. So you might think, why not just push a button and make everyone compliant, right? We could do this and with old devices, but we did do this with new devices. We didn't do it with existing ones. So with the existing ones, just obviously think of an iceberg, right? You see the tip of an iceberg, and we're smart. We know that there's something underneath there, but we're not sure how much is hiding. So we push that button, and then suddenly everything just shows up all at once, and now we're underwater. And icebergs can sink ships. We didn't want that to happen. Besides, if you're not aware, this is a list of certain control what controls get put in place on an endpoint when you deploy CIS level 1. We required level 2, which has more than this, but also doesn't include the software needed for compliance. We also have to test all of the software and settings. So we were testing things like CMD reporter or AV, which has been in place for a while, but we've not deployed it in mass like this. Firewall, this isn't even considering OS updates and software patching, which is part of security enforcement, which some people might not realize. That's actually part of the benchmark, is to keep certain things up to date. So pushing a button was out of the question. So what we decided to do was break down the controls using symmetrics and deploying waves. Now this is where this is kind of the real meat and potatoes of our deployment process. We defined 3 basic metrics. So in order of importance for our decisions were user impact, ease of deployment, and level of security. So user impact is how much is it going to affect the user. This was really weighted heavily in the beginning. We decided to basically deploy all settings that didn't affect the user a lot in the beginning. It's a lot of settings. If I were to look at my actual roadmap, my documentation, most of the settings are in wave 1, and then a few in wave 2, and then not many in wave 3. So ease of deployment, how easy is it to deploy? So config profiles are pretty easy to make and deploy, right? Scripts are a little harder, you have to test them. And then you think about something like an AV install. They're really easy to deploy, mostly if you just deploy a package or something, but fine tuning them is really, really difficult and really time consuming. So it might not be a good thing to do it first. So we decided to say, if these 3 settings are in the same config, we also decided to say, if these 3 settings are in the same config profile, let's add it to the rest. So if we had 3 or 4 settings in a login config, and then there's one that's a straggler that we're considering for a different wave, we would probably just put it in the first wave to see how that would go. And last, how much more secure is the device after implementation? So deploying a config to show a login window message doesn't really make the device much more secure, but if you enforce file vault, that really makes that device a lot more secure. So with the metrics defined, we took a look at the settings we had to deploy and started scoring them. I didn't associate a number value with each of these. There's no, it's kind of an ad hoc scoring system, but and it also kind of fluctuated based on feedback and based on how we based on feedback from the users and how we foresaw the implementation. But if you wanted to define scores, I'm sure you could. So we took our metrics and we started plotting things out. Keep in mind, this is not every check. This isn't even a quarter of them, but this is kind of the idea. So you can see the legend here in the bottom. I'm going to use my mouse. Yeah, I can do that, okay. We grouped things as best we could based on where they fell in the chart. So here is wave 1. Right? These were all simple, unobtrusive settings, lots of config profiles and silent agents that usually don't affect the user. So CMD reporter, our vulnerability scanner. Our enterprise backup solution, even though that's kind of in the user's face. Ours doesn't do anything. If you don't do anything to it, it just sits there and waits for the user to do something. But we're also disabling sharing and Mac, things like that on Mac OS. So wave 2 was more configs, but then we're starting to introduce some more scripts. More user-facing changes and things that users might be upset with, like disabling iCloud or changing browser preferences. These are things that users will notice and they'll probably send you an email about. And finally, the third wave are things that take a lot more time to do and are very noticeable, or both, to the user. Our AV, unbinding the Mac so we could use automated software or automated enrollment. Nomad. Wave 3 is also used for cleanup and adding things that we removed from previous waves based on user feedback. Keep saying user feedback. We'll get to that, but notice I keep saying it. Now, there are 2 here that are marked as project, Enforce OS updates and software packaging. We actually ended up breaking these down into their own sub-project with their own schedules. We knew that these would continue after the main project to secure the environment, so this was kind of a mix of secure and enhance. In the lessons learned, you'll see why this is a little important, but these became almost a project, or they did become a project of their own. So now that we knew how many waves we needed, we made our basic timeline and we're ready to start communicating those things out. A good communication plan is a requirement for a successful deployment. I want to repeat that if you missed it. A good communication plan is a requirement for a successful deployment. So a few pieces of advice with regards to creating an effective communication plan. When communicating, let your users know about very noticeable changes and major policy changes. But you shouldn't let them know about every little thing. So examples, maybe let your users know that you're going to change their login window, privacy policy, or putting a new application in, even if it's not really in their face. You really want to let them know about things like the screen lock time and maybe the AV installation. They're going to really notice that and they're going to probably complain. But you probably don't need to tell them you're installing a log forwarder or adding a shell MOTD. So your list might vary based on your user base and your controls, but just keep in mind that you don't need to put every single change in, but you should be letting them know important ones. Make sure you send out the comms with enough time for the users to take in the info and provide feedback. So even bad feedback is feedback, and you should take it all into consideration. So an example here is we were communicating out that we were going to disable screen sharing using VNC in wave 1. This one's a no-brainer, right? Because VNC, it's not really secure on the Mac OS. And who the heck is going to be using VNC in an environment like this when you have, ARD, or if you have VMs and other servers? Well, we received feedback that a lot of people were using it. And they were using it for collaboration because they found that the tools that we had, Skype, were not really good for this. So we gave them advice on other solutions, like code sharing with Code, or they started using Slack and things like that. And they were happy, but we told them we're going to move it to wave 2 based on their feedback. So they got happy, and then we got happy after we migrated it. And one very important thing that kind of gets overlooked, give positive impacts of the changes. So yeah, you're taking things away and you're altering settings, but there's probably positives to this. Actually, there most certainly are positives to this, especially in the security sense. But use examples like, oh, we're pushing an updated Office client to your machine. Okay, this, the user's like, oh, great, now I got to do this. But you're going to have, the most updated features, and you can get support when needed. Oh, okay, that's a good thing. We're deploying Nomad to your machine. Oh no, another application, but this will sync your local password. And you only need so now you only need one password with your computer, and you're not binding, so you don't have to worry about communication to Active Directory. That's a little more technical, right? Don't use technical jargon, but hey, they might know that. And the backup solution will be deployed to ensure your data is backed up safely in the event of a problem. So, these are good things. So remember, while we're doing this, we're not only trying to secure the environment, we're trying to rebuild relationships. So this is a really good way to do that. Strong communication plan. All right, finally, time to implement changes. You planned it, you're ready for wave 1. All right, so here are the tools that we use to deploy things, right? Jamf Pro. pretty self-explanatory. We used the Jamf CIS scripts. They worked pretty well for us, but we did customize a whole bunch of things to make the checks different and the remediations different because some of it was out of date when we were doing this. The macOS security project, I'm giving a shout out there. The macOS security compliance project, they were not really ready for the time we were doing this, so we really didn't use it. Config profiles, obviously, we used Jamf UI, of course, made our own in Profile Creator at the time, but later iMazing Profile Editor. So I can't recommend either of those enough. So definitely check those out if you're not aware of them. If you're uploading to Jamf, make sure you sign your profile so it doesn't break anything. A note about the custom profiles, though, you will need to make them. So you're going to need to make some custom profiles to get completely compliant in terms of CMMC or NIST. Jamf's UI has been updated and they're adding more changes to it, which is great, but you will be using them because there's some functionality in Jamf or in the Jamf UI that might not work well. We use various scripts found on Git, of course, and provided by the community, and we found we had to write our own to do some things, so we obviously did that. Now, that last one's interesting. So some of our security vendors did provide packages, configs, and scripts. Please make sure you look at these closely before deployment. I use Suspicious Package by Mother's Ruin to look at every single vendor supplied package. I cannot tell you how many times I've received packages from security vendors, major security vendors that are bad, and I've had to send them back and tell them that they need to redo it. So, hint of advice there: don't trust your vendor. Well, I'm joking there. Always look at what you're putting into play. All right, you got your tools set up. So, who's first? Well, early adopters. That's us watching the early adopters to make sure they're not getting hurt. I liked the image. I thought it was funny. So this is important. So when I was demoing this presentation to my partner, I've demoed this like 3 times already. She told me to make this really stand out because she thought it was really important. So I gave it its own slide with animations. Yeah. Find your early adopters early in the process. Remember that. This should go into lessons learned, but I'm making sure that you know it. Find your early adopters early. That is the key to success. Find a good mixture of user types. If you have a lot of devs and a few art directors, you want to get more devs than art directors, basically. You kind of want to get a percentage. So take a good percentage of your environment, directly email them, and ask them that they can be an early adopter, if they want to be an early adopter. In our environment, we have 17 early adopters, and we also use our IT department as early adopters. So we have about 17 users in there that have Macs. So there's another good built-in testing group for you if you have the capability, your IT group. And remember, whomever you choose, communicate and follow up. Make sure that they know that they will be getting changes before everyone else, maybe a week or 2. And make sure that they know things might break. They need to know that. But you shouldn't push out things that you think might break, but you should be testing it internally first. But just let them know that things might break because you're early adopters. But make sure that you do your due diligence to let them know that they have a direct line to you or to somebody on your team to immediately fix something if you break it. They're helping you. You should help them. Always follow up with them. Always ask for feedback. Interact with them. These users are your last line of defense before pushing out a work stopping event. Just remember that early adopters can save your users from disaster and probably save you from losing your job. So here's our updated timeline. So it gives each wave, each early adopter deployment, each communication. It's overly simplified again, but it's pretty good skeleton for deployment. So you note here that security compliance wave 1, early adopters, and then maybe a couple of weeks in, everyone, and then you adjust based on feedback, and then you begin doing this however your schedule works. This is based on our schedule. Again, not our exact schedule. If you saw it, your head might hurt. Note that we also added the patching and OS updates project. That was when we decided we need to start getting a handle on OS updates. This is based on information that when we were deploying, we needed to ensure good rollout of controls, and we realized, okay, we need to get a handle on these quicker, because if we deploy controls that don't work on every computer, we're going to have computers that are not in compliance. All right. So end of the project by the numbers. Our rollout was a success. We did complete the project on time and under budget by about $48,000. I think that's a staffing number. I don't know how this numbers work here. I was going by what my boss gave me. We completed wave 2 much later than planned, but wave 3 was completed just before the deadline. So we did call that a success, but timing got the best of us there. I'll go over that in lessons learned. Along with this, the one data loss incident. So we don't know if this was a user error or if this was caused by the changes, but we did find it important enough to report on because we had one incident where a user lost all of their data. We took that pretty hard, actually. And thanks to our vulnerability scanning and our patching that we started, we saw over 70% decrease in vulnerabilities in the environment. So more on that, actually. These are our actual vulnerability scan results from the weeks. So we went from a high of 19.75 vulnerabilities per endpoint when we only had 223 devices to an average of 425 with 392 devices. Pretty good numbers there, actually. A note about some of these, though, because there are a little bit of a weird patterns, and I kind of want to explain them. So right here, there was a vulnerability with a piece of security software. Yeah. And they didn't patch it for a while. Thankfully they did, and then that's where you see the numbers like completely go down from 360 to 65. And then here, MacAdmins might know an Apache vulnerability in 14 or 15. So Apple patched that later, and our numbers went down, but our numbers were a bit off because of these issues. And also, funny story is some of these are also right after an OS update was released because our vulnerability scans came out. They never failed to come out either after that or a Chrome 0 day was announced. So some of these like red numbers here were Chrome updates. So what did we learn throughout the project? What could we have done to make things better? So first thing, identify your test group early. Find them as soon as you're enrolling devices. Right? If you already have devices enrolled and you're about to start a project like this, get them now. We waited a little while and we shouldn't have. So find them early. As I mentioned, patching ended up being a separate project, but we didn't realize it until a few months in. We should have identified someone to tackle packaging updates and software or OS updates instead of doing it ourselves while also securing the platform. So yes, part of the same goal, but patching takes a lot of time. But you can easily train someone on how to package software and deploy it. If you're lucky enough to have an operations team or person, use them and do it early. We didn't do this. I didn't have the time really to go into this today. I might have, I don't know. But you should be providing KB articles and other support docs with your communications. So if you think you have enough KB articles, you don't. Write more. It's never enough. This is especially important when you're introducing new apps and settings to both your users and support staff. This is also a good time to mention to take the time now to identify support champions. So people who express interest in supporting Macs or that might just want to help. This will help free you up from things like helping users with printers or basic troubleshooting. Get your support desk to do things if you have one. We focused a lot on schedule, right? Keeping schedule. And because of this, we believe we might have had that data loss incident. We don't know if it was our fault, but we knew that we did rush some controls into production. And either way, we knew it could have changed. We could have changed something and let it go a little longer than we did. So it's better to be late than wrong. We should have just waited to do our push, and our lesson was learned. And that last bullet is more of a general lesson learned for big corporations. Don't ignore your Macs. Invest in them. If you have Macs already, the longer you ignore them, the harder and more expensive it becomes to fit them in your environment. And thank you very much. And my resources will be at the end.
All right. So we will go ahead and get into QA here. So our first question comes from Steve, and he asks, did you consider a form of conditional access, whether using Office 365 or not?
I'd probably ask for clarification on the question, but At the time, no. We were just trying to meet the certain security standards, right? We were using our tools that we had at our disposal. We didn't have O365. We didn't have things like Intune available for us. So we were using the tools that we had. And we took guidance from our security team as to how they do things on the Windows side, and we just took that and went in and did it the Mac way, I'm going to say.
Great. I'm pretty sure you may have already answered this, but I'll go ahead and ask this for clarification. But will you be sharing your slides?
Yes, I will probably be putting them up on my website or my Git. I'll catch up with me on the Slack, and I'll see what I can do.
Great. How do you see File Vault impacting users? This person feels that seems kind of invisible to them.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So it is. File Vault is really good about being unobtrusive. It does. Apple did a really good job with making it seem like magic, right? It's you get to you open your computer up and you see the login window. It doesn't matter, you know. It's just a login window. However, we did find that users so because our users were sharing things between each other, they they might have a computer that like sits in a corner or something like that and it's on, and they would access it remotely. So that was a problem for us, right? Because if they were, or for them, if they reboot that computer, obviously it's locked, it's File Vault locked. So they have to do some things with that. The other one was changing the login window. Some users were a little, we had to change the login window to fit, I'm using air quotes there, the CIS standard, because you're not allowed to show an image. But with File Vault, you have to show the image with your username. You have to have a user selector. So we had to explain to users like, hey, you might see this, and then if you might see this window, and we just had to kind of explain to them that the login window might either look different for them or it might react differently if something goes wrong. The other one was, with that, we disabled fast user switching, which I know is not needed, but we did that, and some users were, they saw that as an issue as well.
Great. To follow up on the conditional access, they were clarifying that conditional access would block access to key functions like email for those that are not in Jamf. So I think their question was, would you implement something like that, or why or why
Gotcha.
not?
So our environment's a little more secure. Basically, you can't access email unless you're on the network or on a VPN. So it didn't matter for us at that point. We do some checking for the network. We basically have a SCEP proxy that installs a machine cert on our machine. So if they connect to the network and it doesn't find that machine cert, or it doesn't find other posture checks, if it doesn't pass other posture checks, they don't connect. So that's how we do. We use another product for that. But that's how we do our posture checks. So I guess that would be the conditional access.
Great.
In a way.
Great. Did you have a hard time convincing the powers that be to unbind? What were your selling points?
Yes, this was okay. So we in the middle of the project, early in the project, we hired a contractor. Shout out to Johan McGuire. He was our contractor for a little while. He's probably like, oh, stop dropping my name. But he was the one that helped drive this. We wanted to do it for to take out complexity, and and he was the one that explained it best to our security, basically. And we the general idea is we told them, look, with binding, you're getting almost nothing. You're getting password policy, and you're getting well, that's really kind of about it, right? You're not getting GPO. You'll get printers, but even that is a little wishy-washy at times. So the only thing you're getting is security, is password complexity and history. So we told them we could do that with Nomad, right? Nomad can handle it. We could also do it locally if we wanted to. We don't even need Nomad to do that technically. And we went through that, and they couldn't give us a good reason as to why we needed to bind them, except that. The other one was the machine certs that, when you are bound to act, when they were bound, they got a machine cert, or they got some way to tell that these machines were part of our organization. Well, that's where we came up with the SCEP proxy, right? And it did all that for us. So we basically told them, look, this is the way Apple suggests doing it. That was the other thing is we had Apple come on site during the beginning of the project to do a readiness review. If your organization is on the fence about Macs, like if your higher ups are on the fence, get Apple to come on site if you can, if you could afford that to do a readiness review. They will go through everything iOS and macOS in your environment to tell you what you're doing right and wrong, and then give you at the end a presentation tailored for you that will help you get Macs in your environment. So that one of the big parts was telling basically everybody from Apple saying, don't bind. You don't need to. Here's what you do. Blah blah blah. You're gonna lose this and this, but you can work around that. And that's what was the selling point. And thankfully we had a very good security point of contact on our team, who I work with, and I love him. He's a great guy. He's very pragmatic. He's very approachable, and he also listens to us. And that's the other thing is get good relationship with your security team if you're going to be doing a compliance project. Yeah, you're going to butt heads on things because some security people might want to do things the old school way or the Windows way. It's not going to work on Mac, and you have to just make sure that there's an open dialogue between them. So communicate with them, become friends with them, buy them a beer, soda, whatever they want.
Great. Could you talk briefly about how exceptions were handled, both administratively with like approvals or even technically?
Sure. So in our environment, we have these things called exceptions to policy, right? And what that basically means is you apply for them. You say, I need an exception to a security policy for X, Y, and Z reason. So your users do it, or you do it if you're doing your compliance project. So, and for our case, and a good example would be the locking the keychain. So one of the CIS checks is that you have to lock your keychain after a certain time or whatever, but Apple highly recommends not doing that because it's bad user experience, and you're also going to see problems with their network and email, blah, 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 blah. So we had to explain all that, and then our security person did that. The way we do it, though, for like exceptions policy for users is they apply for it. It gets approved by our security team, and then it goes to us for implementation. And we just implement it by we honestly just make secondary configs or remove them from a policy by using a static group in Jamf. That's really all we do.
Great. And just a refresher on the programs that you were recommending for your environment and your implementation to be secure.
Yeah. So Jamf is what we use, like I said. If you're looking for a log aggregator, CMD Reporter, which is now, I don't know what it's called, Jamf Reporter, I think Jamf just bought them. So, but CMD Reporter was the one that we use with a Splunk Universal Forwarder. For vulnerability scans, I mean, things like Nessus, which is Tenable, I think Qualys, those are good ones, but they're really good for just doing background scans on the system. I can't recommend any AV or firewall. I'm not at liberty to say what we use, but I've heard good things about CrowdStrike. And I'm trying to think. We have a lot of homebrew tools that we use for certain things, like for removable media. We have an internally developed tool that we use. In my resources, I linked to the Jamf CIS scripts, which have been updated for Catalina, but I also linked to the macOS Security Compliance Project. If you're not familiar with it, it's an open source project that is, being both supported by Apple and NIST, and and NASA. They're trying to make a nice framework for macOS security instead of following like the old NIST CIS benchmarks.
How did you deal with legacy issues like 32-bit software or driver/kext support?
So 32-bit software wasn't that bad. It was actually less. We found that to be the least of our worry. We just told people flat out, like, if you have a piece of software that's not able to run on 32-bit, you need to upgrade it. And thankfully, we didn't really have anybody that had that. Maybe a handful of people had these little. We had one user, I think, that had a internal tool that they developed, and it was 32-bit. And they're like, it's old, I'll just update it or whatever. So that was good. But 32-bit software, we didn't worry too much about. What we did when we did the OS update project was we added a in our update script, we added a thing that when you click the button to update, it would bring up a window that tells you, hey, these applications might not work if you upgrade to Catalina. Just keep that in mind. So that, but we got pretty good compliance. Kexts are still a thorn, mainly due to security software. But for the most part, a lot of our tools don't use them. A lot of the user tools, if they have a KEX, we kind of ask them, hey, do you need this, or can you look for a different software, honestly. Thankfully, we don't have a whole heck of a lot in that require it. And our printer drivers, because of our DoD status, we actually only approve certain drivers or certain printer brands to be used. So the ones that we use don't use KEXs.
Great. How did you deal with users that didn't want anything to do with the changes that you were? So I guess the best way to phrase this would be, how did you deal with difficult users? Yeah,
this one was fun. So one thing we did was, so a couple things. So when we had Apple out for the Apple readiness review, we invited a good group of users to come out because Apple wants that. So they came out for a day, remote and on site. This is before the pandemic, but this is also, like, mind you, most of our people are in one location, but we have everybody everywhere. Like, I don't even work close to my headquarters. I'm remote full time. So we had people come in and Apple explained things, and we talked to them. Worked out, but what we did was we sent out a I didn't put this in the presentation, but I have it on our schedule. We put out a survey, a user survey, and we asked them. We basically gave a general questions of, like, how are we doing? What do why if you haven't enrolled yet, why haven't you done this? Blah blah blah. And we got some good feedback, and we then started reaching out to managers. So when we started seeing numbers taper off, we're like, okay, we're getting there, but we noticed that certain groups were being a little hesitant with that. So unfortunately, we had to take a little heavy-handed role, and we had to reach out to managers, tell them, hey, you have to get your guys and gals to do this. And if they didn't by X date, they would lose access to resources, right? So after September 5th, they would lose access to VPN. They would lose access to the network. They lose access to email. Like, all this stuff would just not work because you can't connect to the network without a managed device. And after that happened, well, people started enrolling again. So, you had to take a little bit of a heavy hand. And then the only other thing we did was we told people, like, after this date, X date, if you do not enroll your computer and you need to enroll it later, like you find that you can't connect to the network and you want to connect later, you have to erase your computer. And that kind of scared people too. So, yeah, that was one way to do it. Tough love.
Okay. Did you find you needed any additional resourcing throughout the course of this project in terms of, like, staffing, services, vendors, etc., or was everything basically in place at the project start? I know you mentioned about having an outside contractor.
Yeah. So when I was brought on, there was one person handling the Macs. He kept it afloat, and then when they started securing the environment, they brought me on. I started full time in 2019, I think. And then we brought on a contractor early in, like, January. They didn't work out. We brought another one in who worked out great. And having that third person was great. But we were lucky enough. We have different teams. So I'm on the engineering team. We have an operations team that handles a lot of Windows packaging and things. So we basically took one or two of those guys and said, hey, we're going to train you how to do Mac stuff. And they did some Mac stuff. Same with support is we didn't hire any new people for support or operations actually for the Mac. We just retrained them. So that's how the savings came in, right? We actually did a breakdown of our cost analysis, and we really didn't have to hire anybody. We brought the contractor in so we can, because the schedule went from 12 months to 8 months, so we needed to get it in a little sooner, but we didn't have to rehire anybody for support or for operations. We just retrained. Worked out pretty well.
Great. Fun question. If you had to do this with only open source tools, which ones would you use?
Ooh, okay. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't know. I'm not even going to venture an answer for that one. Unfortunately, I don't have the know-how. I don't have the knowledge of certain tools like that would do this. I mean, certainly Monkey would be a great way to deploy software, right? I guess, and then, like, I would need some sort of MDM, right? So I would, I'd be making things up if I said anything like that. So.
Okay. Any complications found with the M1 devices?
I'll let you know. We have 2 in testing. We found that so far so good. No major problems. Everything that we have works well enough, even in Rosetta. Trying to think. Yeah, all of our stuff works pretty well. Monterey is where it's going to get a little dicey for us when we have, our older software isn't updated yet. But hey, Monterey is still in beta, and we don't deploy M1s yet, but we're still waiting for the complete approval of Big Sur because some security vendors are lacking. And just adding on to that, there might be some security people listening to this. I hope there are. If you're going to choose a security product for macOS that's going to be, like an all-encompassing, like AV or whatever like that, and I get it. Don't just go with the one that you're choosing for Windows, because it's not going to work. I can tell you that right now. You're going to want, you have a lot of security vendors out there that have Mac as a checkbox. Don't just go with them just because you're using them for Windows. Make sure they're the right fit for you. Single pane of glass is really nice and all. Your single pane of glass should be Splunk. That should be your reporting. Single pane of glass for management is also known as single pane in the ass. So just keep that in mind.
Great stuff. So with that, we're out of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and thank John Mahlman very much for taking the time today to deliver this session, the second session, and that will wrap up today's Campfire Sessions.